Nobody seems to understand the construction of NET, the sorting tool that the NCAA has been using the last couple of years. They're not the only metric that people will point to show you the strength and weaknesses of college basketball. You'll hear us reference KenPom. That's put together by a statistician by the name of Ken Pomeroy. He's been doing it for a very long time. KenPom numbers are predictive measures in the same way that ESPN uses their own BPI and various other things. You also have free KenPom, Bart Torvik. He's got his own efficiency numbers that he'll use, and all that stuff is readily available for you to understand. That's the key to Bart Torvik and Ken Pomeroy. They'll tell you what the math is. They'll tell you how it works. You know who doesn't tell you how it works? The NCAA with NET. We talked to John Shire last week, Duke head basketball coach, and he said that this offseason, he's planning on doing a deep dive to understand how NET works. And I told him, well, when you figure it out, come back on the show and explain it to us like we're 5. We talked to Steve Forbes, Wake Forest head coach, who also has been trying to understand what's going on. And best I can tell, Joe, best I can tell, is something that I go back to last year with Mike Krzyzewski at his farewell tour, said the most, to me, pointed thing about NET and its flaws. It really does crystallize how your conference will be viewed in November and December based on a good chunk of your non-conference play. And if you had a not-so-hot November and December, well, then those bad numbers will simply feed into your conference play, which then gets to another issue with the ACC, and that is unbalanced conference slates. The Big 12 has the double whammy in that they had a good non-conference November and December, helped set the table for their season, and now, because they've got 10 teams in the Big 12, round-robin their way into having great numbers. Chris, who does Dat Gum Box Scores as a newsletter, he pointed out that the Big 12, like 85% of their games have been quad one opportunities. How 85% of your games are that? Well, again, it sets into the good numbers. Now, the Big 10 does not have a round robin, and yet how they started their season in November and December has helped feed into their numbers this year. And this is where we get to Ohio State. Ohio State is terrible. Terrible. And yet, every time a team in the Big Ten goes to Ohio State, it's like a Super Mario Brothers question block, and it keeps spitting out one-ups for you to help out your overall net, even though going to Ohio State at this point in time shouldn't get you anything, but it still does. Heck, up until a few weeks ago, Ohio State with a bad record, like a terrible January, was still viewed as a pretty decent win for North Carolina. I'm like, how? That's not a good team. And yet, that's what NET continues to spit out. So, Joe, the ACC's got the double whammy. One, they didn't do a good job in November and December, and then they've got unbalanced conference play, which leads me to this conclusion. The ACC needs to play a round robin in basketball again, meaning they got to play 28 games instead of the current 20 games. Give me all the round robin, and I bet you the numbers might be a little bit different.
I don't know. Here's an idea.
Okay.
Okay. You mentioned the Big 12.
Yes.
Iowa State. Okay. Right now in the league, in the Big 12, Iowa State is in the middle of the road, right? Not that great. You know what they did out of the league? Beat Villanova, beat Carolina, and then in the league, they beat Baylor. Mm-hmm. Guess what? They're beating good teams, particularly out of the league. They also played Connecticut. Played some neutral site games, didn't play a ton of games on the road. That's Iowa State. Oklahoma, who's in last place, 4-12, out of the league, beat Seton Hall. That's not terrible. Florida, pretty good. Here comes the killer. They beat Alabama like it was their job. They beat Alabama by 24 points. So one thing the ACC should actually do, that Alabama-Oklahoma game was part of the Big 12 SEC Challenge. Those games are played in the middle of the schedule. Those games help to get you out of the league and go pick up something else. Number one, the ACC needs to do that, whether it's with the SEC or the Big 12 next year, whatever the ESPN property is, they need to do it. My guess is it'll be the SEC. They need to do that. That's number one that is actually plausible. They're not playing 28 league games, Joe. Number two.
Why not?
Number two, hey, I don't know. Maybe win the games you could win. Like, I don't really want to be, actually, guy, right now, I don't even want to be state grad right now. But if you want to point the finger at one team right now, You're Steve Forbes. You're Brad Brownell. You're Jeff Capel. All of them probably would point the finger at Carolina. But if you're any of them, you know who you're mad at? Oh, hey, Carolina, you're preseason number one, so your non-conference schedule is set up in such a way that you're playing marquee matchup games. Hey, Carolina, maybe not lose to Iowa State, who's a middle-of-the-road Big 12 team.
Yeah.
Okay? I can't explain to you all of the math to either KenPom or the net, but I know this. When Iowa State beats Carolina, then every team who beats Iowa State then is basically given credit for beating Carolina. Okay? That's how this works. You know what Carolina did this weekend? They beat the one team they needed to beat because Virginia beat Baylor. Virginia beat Illinois, I think, out of the league as well. So for all these ACC teams on the bubble, the only team that offered you any hope was Virginia because they were the ones who did their jobs out of the league.
Yep.
Carolina losing to Iowa State was a killer. Carolina not beating Alabama in a 4-overtime game was a killer. All of these net numbers look a whole lot different for Wake Forest and for NC State and for Duke and for anyone else who's beaten Pitt. We're still talking. Pitt's in first freaking place in the ACC, and we're talking about. I'm like, well, maybe they'll get in.
Yeah, maybe.
And it's like, huh?
Clemson's in the same boat, by the way.
But now Pitt. Why don't you blame Pitt, Giglio? Well, look at Pitt's non-conference schedule. They did not have the opportunities that Carolina had. You know what Pitt did out of the league though? Capel beat his boy Chris Collins. Northwestern's one of the best 20 teams in the country right now, no doubt. So you have to win games, as Mark Gottfried, bracketologist extraordinaire, once said, no, not my juices. In addition to my juices flow all the time, every team who makes the tournament has to play their way into the tournament. So you want a free pass for whatever? No. Nobody gets a free pass. And you want to yell at Carolina for playing poorly early in the season? Go right ahead, because they're the biggest problem right now.
To your point about Virginia, yeah, they did beat Baylor. They did beat Illinois. You can even throw in Michigan as a good win for the Cavaliers. Of course, they're starting to trail off, which will close the conversation like this. Unlike college football, where there's only so many data points you can use, the NCAA tournament gives you a bazillion data points over the course of a season. But the one thing we have to recognize, and the one thing I wish we'd get back to, is at least acknowledging or crediting teams for playing better basketball as the season progresses. You have to be in some shape or form rewarded for, are you a tournament team? Well, maybe we weren't back in November and December, but who is? And a team can come around and start playing, and there's all sorts of dynamics for that, transfers, freshmen, etc., right? So I don't like this idea that you're cast as this particular team at the beginning of the year when we don't know anything about you, and you're really leaving it open to all sorts of randomness. So I would actually start to put some value back on, are you a tournament team now? Do you look like a squad that can win a couple of games? I mean, look at Kentucky. Kentucky is one of these teams that was left for dead however long ago it was, and now they look to be kind of getting with the program, and there's a bunch of reasons why that's the case. I'll tell you what, to get back to Duke, the way Duke's playing right now, there's all sorts of ways you can explain why Duke was where it was 2 months ago. They certainly look like a better team now. It helps that you have all your players, and they're all playing together now. What a concept. So to your point, yeah, winning, what a concept. Also, teams improve. How do you measure that? And right now, that's the biggest flaw that I have with net. There's no real good way to measure if you've improved over time because, well, you are at the you basically are left to other teams helping determine that.
Before we go, you mentioned KenPom at the start.
Yeah.
And the NCAA has included in the net efficiency numbers.
Yeah.
If you just look at the KenPom efficiency numbers for adjusted offense and adjusted defense, the ACC has 2 teams in the top 30 in offense and 1 team in the top 30 in defense. So the efficiency numbers are hurting the ACC as well. It's not just the scheduling. It's not just what these top teams have done out of the league. They haven't, the good teams haven't even been efficient in doing what they're doing.